1990. And I'm sitting on the hardwood floor of my living room, and I have just stopped breathing. I was always the kid that was into science fiction and fantasy movies, Never-Ending Story, Star Wars, Dark Crystal. I love them all. But today I'm extra excited because in my VCR is Back to the Future 2. And the reason I have just stopped breathing is because in the future, Marty McFly is taking a work call from home on a television screen. And not only is that the coolest thing I've ever seen, but also somehow, deep down, I just know that one day I will take a work call from home on a television screen. And I was right. The first ideas forecasting video telephony date back to about 1870. That's 50 years before there was any available science or technology that would have even allowed it to start being built. Those who came up with the ideas for video telephony didn't know how to make it happen. And they only had the audacity to conceive of such things is because as humans, we share an ideological value to continuously improve the way we live through technology. The dreamers had to dream it. The builders built it. And now we all have screens in our pockets. For 20 years, I've been working in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion, helping to reduce inequities in schools, communities, and workplaces. And I will tell you, we have gotten really good at identifying inequity and raising awareness about systemic racism, and even finding ways to make things better. But that doesn't mean that we're radically transforming the conditions. For example, over the last couple years, many people have come into the understanding that our systems are inherently racist, and that is because so much of our world was built on the ideologies of white supremacy. That understanding has been tremendous for helping to advance the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as a consequence to understanding that racism is inherent, it becomes difficult to imagine a world where it doesn't exist. So we spend our time fixing problems, reducing inequity, increasing diversity, bringing people together to have conversations about unconscious bias and belonging. And although that is critically important work that we must continue, if we spend all our time just fixing the problems we have right now, we're not spending any time building the world that we want. A world where racism doesn't exist. A world where someone's life outcomes is no longer predictable by their race and their zip code. If we want that world, a world that is truly free from oppression, we're gonna have to do better than increasing diversity or closing wage gaps or even dismantling white supremacy. That is not gonna make us free. If we wanna live in a world that is truly free from oppression, we first need to dream of what a world free from all forms of oppression and supremacy actually looks like. In order to build it, we need to dream it first. Yes. In my work as a DEI facilitator and an executive coach, one of the frameworks that I often share is called the eyes of oppression. It's a way of understanding how oppression is created and perpetuated. These are ideologies, institutions, interpersonal relationships, and intrapersonal relationships. For example, professionalism and hair. Because the dominant ideology of white supremacy is what it is, the people who got to define what professionalism is tended to have straight, non-textured hair. Institutions then uphold that ideology, and they create policies that ban hairstyles like locks and braids. Interpersonally, we hold each other accountable to those ideologies by enforcing policies. And this looks like a wrestling referee chopping off the hair of a high school student before allowing him to compete in his wrestling match. And even though we should not need the research to show us that this kind of racialized violence has lasting intrapersonal impacts, the research consistently confirms it. The more I spend my time working with companies who are trying to become anti-racist and build more inclusive workplace cultures, the more I'm asking myself, what if these parts of our social ecology, ideologies, institutions, interpersonal and intrapersonal relationships, what if these aren't the eyes of oppression? What if these are the eyes of influence? And what if in order to bring about any kind of societal or cultural change, we need to shift them all? If that's the case, it's something to be excited about. Because we are doing more work in 3 of those areas than we ever have before. Intrapersonally, we are learning to have better relationships with ourselves. We are embracing things like pleasure and rest, and now peace and hope as practices. We are even evaluating our relationship to whiteness and power and privilege. Interpersonally, we are learning to communicate better. We are setting boundaries with our families, our partners, our friends, and our workplaces so that we can take better care of ourselves and each other. Institutions are taking a more active stance on hate and violence, and we are organizing more and more people to be involved in our political process so we can resist the ideas that will keep us trapped in a cycle of hate and violence. And although we can see resistance from those who want to keep us trapped in the system of white, heteronormative, cisgender supremacy, I think we're making progress. But I still think we're doing a lot of fixing problems instead of transforming the conditions. Y'all, we need more dreams, more stories, more ideas about what our social futures free from oppression can actually look like. Right now, we don't do this well. What we do really well is exploit stories of conflict. We can tap into anger and hate in an instant. We tell stories and make movies about the fight for liberation, but that all centers the fight. And this makes sense. Liberation only exists within the context of oppression. If we are not oppressed, there is no need to be liberated. If we want to live in a world that is truly free from oppression, we need to start dreaming up a world that is truly free from all forms of violence, hate, systemic inequity, gender bias, and more. And the truth is, I don't even know if we're clear on what it is we're actually trying to build. So in order to get there, we're gonna need more stories. And I promise you, I am not saying that we can manifest our way out of oppression. And I'm also not saying that. You know, y'all know what I'm talking about. And in order to do that, we need to have the audacity to believe that our social future is just as important to improving our way of life as our technological future. So here's my invitation to you. Gather in your homes and communities. Talk about the world that you want to live in, not focusing on all the ways that things are bad, but focusing on what you do want. Create those stories, write them, dance them, paint them, sing them, practice them when and where you can. Because it's only then that we can start to ask the most important questions. How do we get there? How do we get to a world that is truly free from economic injustice? How do we live in a world that is free from oppression, where people can have access to better than adequate housing and health care, where people can have access to educational options that fit the needs of all learners, where our justice system is truly just and our government leaders represent us all, where people can love who they love and own their own bodies. What do we need to believe to bring that future forward? And what do we need to release? In order for the builders to build it, we need to dream it first. And then someday, some kid sitting on their hardwood floor will look around at all these representations of a free world, and they will say, one day, that will be me. And they will be right. Thank you.